Let's take a look at Project 5 for Algebra 2B. This is part 3. So we're looking at the survey that the reporter has made for the kingdom. And we want to know, are any of the questions in his survey phrased in a way that will likely cause a biased response? And you remember, and I talked about this in a kind of a great detail in my last video, which is, bias is an unfairness, a skew. It kind of persuades the responder to answer in a certain way. So let's look at each question. So the first question, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being not terrified at all, actually kind of excited in a good way, and 5 being so terrified I'm buying diapers, how terrified are you that Gormondo is coming to town? So is there any language in here that is not neutral and that kind of persuades the way you feel about this? Do you feel like the way they're phrasing this is fair? Or do you feel like you can kind of read into, I bet I can tell how the person that wrote this question felt about the answer. I bet I can guess what their answer would be. If you feel like this question is not neutral, then it is a biased question. And you can usually kind of point to specific words in the question that might be causing the bias. Second question, have you done anything or will you do anything to prepare your kitchen for the visit, for Gormondo's visit? Again, is there any word in here that kind of clues you into what the question maker was thinking? Do you feel like you can tell what they would answer themselves? Do you feel like there's any word in here that's not neutral, that kind of skews the way and makes you feel like you're supposed to answer a certain way? And the same thing with question 3. Have you done or will you do anything to prepare for any other part of your home before the visit? Again, is there wording in here that's not neutral? Is there a particular word that when you read it makes you think, oh, it seems like they're trying to get me to answer a certain way? If that's true for any of these questions, then that question would be biased and you'll want to select it. And it could be one or more. Now, if you did identify one or more survey questions that you believe are biased, rephrase the question so that it is unbiased, the question or questions. So just like I was saying before, there's usually a particular word or a part of the sentence that lets you know that the question is biased. So let me think of an example. Let's say I am a fan of, rain. And I say, how happy are you that it rained today? So my question is, how happy are you that it rained today? This is a biased question because I'm kind of leading them, I'm forcing them to be happy, right? I'm saying, well, at the very least, you're kind of happy. Maybe these are my answer. Kind of happy. Very happy. Just a normal, regular happy. Or super, very, extra happy, right? But the point is that with all of these choices, maybe somebody hates the rain. Maybe they're not happy at all. Maybe they're actually kind of mad, or maybe the rain makes them sad, right? But you can tell that I've phrased this by injecting the word happy into it. I'm suggesting to the responder how they should feel. So in this question, you're supposed to rewrite, if there was a biased question, you're supposed to rewrite it. So I could rewrite my biased question by saying, how do you feel about the rain today? Right? So I just want to know how they feel about the rain. And I'm not giving away a positivity or negativity to it. I'm just asking, how do you feel? It's a very neutral question, and it doesn't really persuade bias. And it's very difficult to get a question that truly is unbiased. We just do the best we can, right? And certainly I've rephrased this in a much better way than it was before. And that's what you're doing here. Just rephrase the question or questions that you identified as biased so that they aren't biased. Next, remember that there are 5,000 inhabitants in the kingdom, and if Cal wants a confidence level of 95% and a margin of error of 2% for his results, how many inhabitants should he survey? So this is all about reading this chart. Now, I got this is actually linked in the project. right after this question it says, be sure to use the blah 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 tool. Just open it up, you'll see this exact image. I copied and pasted it off of the site. So I'm going to use this to figure out how many inhabitants I should survey. So you base it off of the population size, the confidence level we want, and the margin of error we're looking for. So I'm going to go down population size, and I'm going to find my 5,000 row. Okay, so I know that the number I'm looking for is somewhere in this row. Next, I am going to look at my confidence level, which is 95%. So I know that my answer is going to be somewhere in here, right? So I'm just narrowing it down. My confidence level is going to be one of these highlighted. It's kind of hard to find a highlighter that shows up. Oops, there we go. Yeah, that works. Right? And the reason that I re-highlighted those, notice that those 4 entries are the only ones that fall in the 5,000 row, and also the confidence sort of umbrella. Finally, the margin of error is 2%, so what is the only box that falls under the 95% margin of confidence level in the 2%? There are other 2% boxes, right? So I'm looking for, oops, that's not working anymore. I'm looking for a box that falls in the 5,000 row under the 95% confidence level and under the 2% margin of error. So there's only one box that's going to meet all of that criteria, and that's going to tell me the number of inhabitants I should survey. And in fact, let me just model a different example for you, because I think this one, because of the colors on here, it's kind of hard to see the highlighting. I'll use my pen instead. So for example, I'm just going to make up some numbers. Let's say I had 100 inhabitants, and I wanted 90% confidence and a margin of error of 5%. If I wanted to figure that out, I would find my population size of 100. I know my answer is going to be somewhere in this row. Okay. Next, the confidence level of 90% happens right in here, which means that I can eliminate all of these answer choices, okay? I've gone to my 100 row, but I'm also looking under a confidence of 90%. And finally, a margin of error of 5%, the only box that falls in that row is that one. So I can see that I would need to survey 74 inhabitants. You'll do the same thing, but for 5,000 inhabitants with a confidence level of 95% and a margin of error of 2%. So here's another scenario, and this time, same number of inhabitants, but we're talking about a different confidence level and a different margin of error. So once again, there are 5,000 inhabitants. You'll go to the 5,000 inhabitants row. He wants a confidence level of 90%. You'll look under these columns that fall under the 90% confidence, and a margin of error of 1. You'll look under that column. So there's only one box that's going to meet all 3 of those criteria, and that is going to tell you the number of inhabitants he should survey. Once again, I'll come up with a different example. Let's say I had 100,000 inhabitants. I wanted a confidence level of 99% and a margin of error of 1%. I would look under my 100,000 inhabitants row, and I know my answer is going to be somewhere in this row. Okay, next, confidence level of 99%. I know that it's going to be somewhere in here, which means I can eliminate all these boxes. It has to be a green box. Finally, a margin of error of 1%. It has to be in this column, so it must be this number. Okay, so I know that if I wanted to represent a population of 100,000 with 99% confidence and a 1% margin of error, I would choose to survey 14,230 inhabitants. Notice that as our confidence goes up, well, in fact, let me not say that. Let's just look at the trends in the numbers very briefly. So first of all, notice that when the population size is really small, you have to the proportion is much larger. So for a population size of only 10, across the board, they're saying you better just survey all 10 of those people. When the population size comes up to 50, notice that the numbers are still very close to the actual population size itself, okay? As the population gets much larger, Look, 500 is the population here, but you're still getting numbers in the 400s, the 300s, like pretty close to the actual population size. When I get way up high to a population of 500,000, notice that just the proportion, I'm only having to interview, here it's 16,000, but it goes as low as 663. Just notice how much lower these numbers are compared to the actual population size as the population grows, right? So the proportion of the the sample to the population size, that proportion diminishes as our population gets larger. Notice also that as the margin of error increases, the sample size drops. So if I want a 1% margin of error, and that's true across the board, if I'm looking at all the orange boxes, as margin of error increases, the population size goes down. If I'm looking at all the yellow boxes, as margin of error increases, the sample size goes down. Again, in all the green boxes, as margin of error increases, the sample size goes down. So in order to get a smaller margin of error, we need to survey more people. Similarly with confidence level, as confidence increases, so confidence increases going this way, let's take a look at the numbers. And in fact, let's just compare the same margin of error to make it easy. So for example, if I look at a 1% margin of error, this is a 1% margin of error, and this is a 1% margin of error, but all at different confidence levels. As the confidence level increases going this way, notice that the sample size increases as well, from 2876 to 32 to 3843, okay? So again, as the population size grows, the proportion of inhabitants that you need in your sample compared to the population size goes down. As we increase the margin of error, in fact, a better way to say that would be to decrease. So as we decrease our margin of error, we increase our sample size. And as we increase our confidence level, we increase our sample size as well. Okay? Let's continue. Or actually, yeah, we're ready to continue. All right. If Calamity surveyed 1,347 of the kingdom's 5,000 inhabitants and used a confidence level of 99%, what would the margin of error be? So we know that the confidence level is 99%. We know that the population size is 5,000. So we know that we're looking at this particular little area, right, that falls in this row and in these green boxes. So they told us that he surveyed 1,347, so here's our number, and the question is just, what margin of error would this be? So you just need to look at this margin of error heading and tell us what column does 1347 fall under. Is it a 1%, 2%, 3%, or 5% margin of error? And finally, if a population is 5,000 and 1,000 people are surveyed, or people or creatures are surveyed, this could result in any of the following combinations of confidence levels and margins of error. As you can see, as the confidence level increases, the margin of error also increases, so there's a trade-off. Okay? So there's a trade-off between confidence level and margin of error. As I increase my confidence level, my margin of error increases as well. And that's not a good thing, right? Margin of error. We want to keep this number as low as possible. We want confidence to be as high as possible and margin of error to be low as possible. As we increase confidence, margin of error increases as well. And this is keeping the same population size, right? So if we had more people, we could affect these numbers differently. But this is saying with 1,000 people and sticking at that number, if we want to have a higher confidence level, the margin of error increases. So the question is, if I'm looking at these three options, what do you think you would use to report your results? Would you present results of a confidence level of 90% with a lower margin of error? Would you do something in the middle, or would you present a really high confidence level but with also a high margin of error? What do you think makes sense here? What option would you use to report these results if it were you? So again, you'll receive credit for any choice. You just need to justify your response. Talk about what you think, what's more meaningful maybe will come into play. So if to you think it's more important to have that really high confidence level, or do you think it's important to have a low margin of error? What do you think people will respond to? Again, no correct answer here. Just answer the question and then support your answer with a couple sentences justifying your response.